But you can't say the science, and then say, but God entered in here, and God entered in there. And I think if he's Roman Catholic, the Roman Catholics say you can believe in all that Big Bang, abiogenesis, and evolution stuff, but you have to believe God breathed the soul into man. Well, haven't you left the science at that point? So at some point, no matter who you are, you pretty much got to leave the science. And as we were talking about, what does he believe about death? Now, what the Catholic Church has done, from people that I've talked to anyhow, is they say, oh, there was only no death in paradise, right? There was death everywhere else in the world, but where Adam and Eve were in paradise, there was no death, and that's all that mattered. The Church Fathers don't say that. They said there was no death anywhere. And even the scriptures don't say it. The creation was subject to vanity. The creation was subject to corruption from the sin of man. So the problem with all of this is, God says to Adam and Eve, don't eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, because when you do, and the day that you do that, you will die, right? So death there is considered to be a bad thing. But if God used death from the beginning to create everything, because evolution's fraught with death, right? Then it has to be a good thing, because at the end of the 6 days, God looked at everything he did and he said, everything I did is good. That would include death from evolutionary perspective. And now he's turning right around and saying to Adam and Eve, but if you eat of this, you'll die, and it's bad. Well, why is it bad now? And it wasn't bad for supposedly the millions or however many years it was that all this death is in the world. So, so then when Jesus comes to defeat death, well, why is he defeating something that God called good and now calls bad? And now Jesus has to do it because God changed his mind and said it was bad.
Right.
And I guess you could say, well, it was only bad for humans. But why is it bad for humans? If it created humans, if it was part of the creation process of humans, then why is it bad? From an evolutionary perspective, we only exist, at least in part, because of death. Right. So now all of a sudden it's going to be bad. It's just, you can say that, I guess, but it's not. I don't think it's horribly consistent. I think it's much more consistent to say God's not the author of death. Death is the breaking down of life. It doesn't have a positive existence of its own. God didn't create anything in the process of breaking down. Just like evil is the process of is the rejection or the breaking down of the good. God didn't create anything in the process of breaking down. Everything is good. When he declared everything good, that means there's no death, there's no destruction, there's no breaking down, because that's not good. The good is in the fullness, right? The good is in life, not in death. So that's why we believe that it was a sin of man that caused everything to break down, not God. Otherwise, you're making God responsible for death and disease and destruction and everything else. And then people rightly say, well, what sort of God is this?
Right.
I mean, he created this world filled with death and destruction and disease, where young children are dying and earthquakes and hurricanes and all the destruction. What sort of God is this?
Yeah.
And we can, and those of us who believe in the regular story, we can say, no, we did that. We're to blame for that. Our sin, when we separate ourselves from God, who is life, we brought death into the world. And when we brought death into the world in ourselves, we're no longer worthy to live in a paradise anymore, because we're corrupted, we're dying. The rest of the world we have to live in is now a world of death and destruction. But that's created by us, not God.
Yeah.
And when you go ahead.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you separate yourself from the source of all life and goodness.
Yes.
Right. So it's just a natural consequence of that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, I guess the accusation that gets leveled on Christians is that we're just a bunch of like science denying, I don't know, superstitious people or something. But we hold what has been revealed because those, like you said, those things are so fundamental about who God is, who man is. Like you said, what kind of God is this? And we say, well, that's not the God that we know. This is not what's been revealed. It's important that we hold to these things because we're not just going to follow some scientific fad just to be so we don't get called names. We're going to hold to what has been revealed as true, because that is revealing to us the loving God who did create us. and that we do want to be back in communion with. It's fundamental.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, the book of Romans talks about the creation being subjected to vanity because of us, and then when we are revealed as the sons of God, then the creation also will be fixed. Well, if it was fixed, it has to mean that it got broken. And it's not broken if this was God's plan all along. But if God's plan all along was to make an earth that was a paradise, our entire earth that was a paradise, then we can say, okay, it broke because of us. But those verses in Romans don't make any sense if the thing was broken from the beginning. If God created it broken, and again, what sort of God is that he can't even create something that's not broken? Why would he do that? And we weren't supposed to die. We could die, but ideally we wouldn't have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil before it was time. That wasn't evil in and of itself. It's just that there was a certain time frame for it. Some of the fathers say it was the last step to our ultimate perfection and so on. But if we would not have done that, we would have lived forever. That's what God wanted for us. Now, obviously, he knew we weren't going to do that, but that's the opportunity we had, and lived forever in paradise. We are I try to say this out on campus all the time. God is never wrong. God is never to blame. We're always wrong. We're always to blame, right? So when they say you can't know who God is, they're saying God's at fault because I really want to know, but he won't make himself known, right? Adam said, God, the woman you made gave me the fruit and I ate it. Again, it's a condemnation of Eve, but he's also blaming God. If God wouldn't have given him that woman, she wouldn't have given him the fruit and he wouldn't have eaten it. So we're always trying to blame God. But God's never to blame. God creates paradise. God creates everything good. But we have to have the choice. If we're going to rise to the height of love and goodness and God-likeness, we have to have the choice to get there. This is all about relationship, right? I was trying to tell that to somebody again today. It's all about relationship, or maybe it's just whatever. It's all about relationship. The Trinity is a relationship. He wants us to enter. He wants us to enter into the relationship, right? This isn't just a legal thing. So the relationship needs freedom. We have to freely enter into it, right? Nobody can force to love somebody. You can't be forced into a marriage where you love your spouse. You can't be forced to stay. You have to do it willingly. And if we so we had that opportunity, we blew it. Jesus came to fix it, and here we are. Hopefully, we'll all choose to be fixed one day.
That's right. Okay, so a couple more things. There's one point, and I won't play this, but there's one point where Matt Walsh makes this argument. He says, God deceives us by making things look old that are not. Okay, which is, again, he is assuming that the science, which is built on the presuppositions that the only way that they could look is that they're old. He's assuming that is sort of this bulletproof kind of approach. Having taught science for the years that I did, you end up teaching the same thing over and over, and you get a chance to kind of think slowly about those things. What you realize actually is, first of all, their theory requires that everything be old because the odds are so remote that they need all that time. And as you said, Gary, even then the odds are basically zero. But the other thing is, if you there's a variety of different ways to measure the age of something according to the science. You can measure the light waves. You can measure the amount of salt in the ocean. You can measure how certain elements break down. You can look at layers. And what actually tends to happen is you get a bunch of different dates based on that bunch of different methods. And the truth of the matter is they do not line up, right? We would expect, the salinity of the ocean should match up exactly with the light rays, should match up directly with the atoms breaking down, the radioactive decay. None of those line up. And so the tendency is to stack them in the way that makes it the oldest, because that's usually how that goes. there's a lot of, the end result is there's a lot of different scientific theory, especially about how things came to be, even in the shorter term. Where did all the water of the earth come from? Where did our sun come from? The sort of frameworks that we have don't really hold together either. So he's assuming that, the science, and that is what we're taught, that this science is just cut and dried. And if you deny that it's billions and billions of years old, that you're just some sort of weirdo. But the truth of the matter is, actually, they don't know a lot of these things. They have theories as to how they fit together, but they don't all line up. And so, there's actually no reason why a lot of these things can't be significantly younger and quite young, actually, just assuming different circumstances.
Yeah,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to our presuppositions.
Mm-hmm.
The example I like to use on campus is, if God creates Adam and Eve right now, and they probably looked around 20 years of age to us, but he creates them right now. He gets some secular scientists to study them and look them over and say, well, how old are Adam and Eve? They're going to say, well, they're 20 years old. And we're going to say, no, they're a couple hours old. And they're going to say, oh, you tricked us. We didn't trick them. They had the wrong presupposition. They believed in naturalism. They believe in a natural, that they were born, and it took 20 years to get that. So if you believe in naturalism, the tinted glasses you have on are automatically going to show you long periods of time. Because like you said, you need that. It's not, nobody's trying to trick you. God isn't trying to say, oh, look, I'm going to trick these foolish humans. Again, it's not God's fault, it's our fault. We have the wrong presuppositions. We have the wrong starting point, and we have the wrong tinted glasses. And now, do you have the clip where he talks about the stars? He was talking about one star, one of these. I can just talk about it if you don't have it there.
I don't think I see it. Yeah.
Well, one of the things he said was, the stars are like some sort of irrefutable proof that the universe is billions of years old. And he talked about a star recently found by one of these telescopes we sent out in space, 9 billion years, 9 billion light years away. Mm-hmm. And he says, so when you're looking at that, you're looking at something that happened billions of years ago. So it took 9 billion years for that light to strike the Earth, so we could see it. So that's irrefutable proof that the stars are, or the universe is 9 billion years old. But again, it's the assumption of naturalism. It's the assumption that those stars came in naturally, and then it naturally took 9 billion years for the light to hit the Earth. But what God says is, he created the stars created the stars to light the day or light the night. He created it for us. And again, he's not subjected to laws of physics. People who are old Earth creationists, whoever, that kind of poo-poo this idea that God could create the light in transit, as they say. In other words, he can create it so it can be seen on the Earth from the moment he created it. Why is that difficult for God to do? The only reason they're kind of discrediting that is because they believe in naturalism. Mm-hmm. That's the only reason. So again, you're going to see everything through the tinted glasses you have on. Everybody looks at the exact same evidence. You look at the universe and all the life in it. The one who is right is not the one who has the most evidence. The one who is right is the one who has the right tint to their glasses. So is naturalism true? Then yes, then the universe probably is 14 billion years old or whatever. If naturalism is true, number one, you're stuck with certain things. You're stuck with something akin to a Big Bang. You're stuck with abiogenesis, life from non-life, and you're stuck with evolution. You have nowhere else you can go if you start with naturalism. So as soon as you start with naturalism, that's it. That's your pathway. Maybe you can tweak Big Bang to something else, but abiogenesis and evolution, you're stuck with that. All right. So if naturalism is true, then their understanding is probably pretty close. But if naturalism is not true, it could be way off. So I would have no problem if they came out and said, well, we believe in naturalism. It's their starting point. Just like first chapter of Genesis is our starting point. Both of us have a starting point. They didn't come to this conclusion by looking at the evidence. That's their hypothesis, right? So Matt Walsh says at some point, Well, the young Earth creationists, they just try to fit everything into the first chapter of Genesis. That's not real science. I'm not a scientist, maybe as you are, but my understanding was you have an hypothesis. You put it out there. This is what you think has happened or whatever. And now you look at the evidence and see if it fits the hypothesis. So yes, we hypothesize that the first chapter of Genesis is, at least the creation scientists hypothesize that the first chapter of Genesis is true. Then they look at the evidence and see if they can fit it in there. Well, the secular scientists do the same thing. They hypothesize the naturalism and uniformitarianism, and then they see if they can fit the evidence into it. They're both doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And what each individual has to do is look at them and say, okay, which one, either which one do we believe, or which one do we think the evidence fits in best? But they both have as a starting point either naturalism or creation, and then they're trying to see if they can fit the evidence in.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's run this last little bit, and then we can continue talking, but we'll be done with the clip.
You know, rather than treating science like it's some sort of black magic, really we should see that science is a form of revelation. It's God revealing things to us. It's what it means to reveal. You know, we things are being revealed to us through science about the nature of the earth and how God goes about creating things. And that's a wonderful thing. So, this was a long one. That's why I'm not a young Earth creationist. And it's why I think this view can have the effect of discrediting Christianity and creating very unnecessary stumbling blocks. So I hope that you'll take that into consideration. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Godspeed.
All right. Yeah, you know, we're not saying science is black magic. What we're saying is this isn't, what I would say is, this isn't proper hard science. Maybe forensic science, maybe, although I don't think they could even do that. But it's not hard science. It's not observing something, experimenting on it, reproducing it, seeing if it does the same thing over and over again. You've got all these experiments, you've got all this data, you've seen it out multiple times, and you can say this is the way it is. Nobody was there to see it. It's not what I would call hard science, right? You're talking about something that nobody was there to see. And again, there's two possibilities, God or no God, and you're leaving out God right from the beginning. And you're going with no God, and you're stuck with Big Bang or something like it, abiogenesis and evolution, and that's how you're going to see everything. But it's not a hard science. I don't know any Christian who looks at all of science and says it's all foolishness, right? But we don't take everything that scientists say as gospel truth either. You know, we want to see, is this backed up? And you know, there have been things, and you know, many people kind of disagree with the great calamities of climate change or whatever. Well, you're denying science. Well, let's see. Let it play out. You know, don't be dictatorial. Don't be, you know, like this sort of, you know, tyrannical, you have to believe what we're saying right now, because you're talking about things that are going to happen in the future that you don't know what the future is going to hold. But when things that are concrete, that you can measure, that you can do all these experiments on, yes, I don't know any Christian that says no, but you know, that can't be true. Mm-hmm. But now we're talking about something that we believe God has revealed, and science can't look at it. They don't have the tape. They can't reproduce it. And so, yeah, we're going to go with what God has revealed over and above a forensic science that really isn't that good, because we don't see these things happening. And another thing is that the scientists tend to hide behind time, right? They'll either say, oh, it takes so long, when you say, oh, we've never seen, you know, fish to amphibian sort of evolution. Well, you know, it takes so long that we won't be around to see it. Mm-hmm. Or they'll say, well, it happened so long ago that nobody was here to see it. Just trust us, we're the scientists. Yep. No, I'm not going to trust you because you're the scientist. If that's all you can say is trust me, then no, I'm not going to buy into that. So you got to do a little bit more than that. So anyhow.
Yeah, and I would say especially along those same kind of lines, especially when the things that we might expect to see, for example, like extensive fossil records that show the connections from one species to another is absolutely absent. And where they've tried to piece those things together, some of the times it's really ridiculous. This reminds me, there was there's this doctor that I like to listen to sometimes because he talks about different scientific things. So he was talking about this guy, Dewey Larson, who is, I guess he gave this talk like even in the 70s, and he made this distinction between, he called it inductive versus inventive science. So inductive is like what you're describing. You make a direct observation, you set up an experiment, you're inducing that information, you are figuring that out, you're isolating the variables. He said, and then he compared that to inventive science, which basically says, okay, I'm going to assume this idea, I'm going to set out this theory, and it doesn't require any observation on my part. I'm going to overlay that theory on something. I'm inventing the reason for it, and then everything follows from that. So to give an example, now evolution is completely this way because we, like you said, because we cannot observe these things. It is an inventive science. You are proposing something that you cannot go back and observe directly. So another thing, for example, was related to this. An inventive science was the origins of virology, right? So initially, they didn't know why people got sick, and they identified bacteria. And then there were other sicknesses where people clearly did not have a bacterial cause, and they said, oh, there must be some sort of invisible thing going on. There must be a virus. And so at any rate, so that was not based on any direct observation. Now over time there's electron microscopes and so on, and an inventive science can turn into an inductive science if the means are there for actually observing something. But how do you actually observe these things? How do you observe one species turning into another? How do you observe non-life turning into life? It's an utter impossibility. It is necessarily an inventive science, and because of that, it's trying to explain something, but it is only just an explanation. And if there's another explanation for the same thing, it has to be equally as valid if it takes into account the other presently observable things. So
yeah, one of the things that's bothered me for a long time is that anytime you want to try to teach creation from a scientific perspective in the schools, they end up taking you to court to try to stop it. Now, from my experience on campus, if somebody doesn't want to be challenged, then they probably aren't real sure of their beliefs, right? And so if you are sure of your beliefs, then you want to be challenged. What they say is, oh, that's just religion, or that's just foolishness. Well, then let it be taught alongside what the evolutionary science and so on, and you'll just show it to be foolishness. Mm-hmm. And then you'll win the day, and you won't have to worry about it anymore. But to say that, to go and get court orders that you can't teach it, shows there's some sort of fear here. Because for me, I go out, and others go out and do this too, not just me, but I go out every day, and I want people to challenge me, because I either want to know that I don't know my beliefs well enough, or I want them to know that they don't know theirs well enough. But I want them to challenge me because I believe that what I'm saying is true. So anytime you try to stop the other side from speaking, there's a problem. So I always thought the best, or at least a good class at Penn State would be, or even in the high school would be, first half of semester, you get your best secular scientist up there to give his take on Big Bang, abiogenesis, evolution, all the evidence, of one or all of those three that he can do. half semester's over, you get tested to see if you pay attention or not. Second half of the semester, you get your best creation scientist in there to do the same thing, tested on it, and your final is to write a paper on which you believe is true or why. Okay. Now, if the secular science is so good and so absolute, you shouldn't have to worry, because the vast majority of people there are going to say, oh, well, these guys did such a much better job. That's obviously true. And you might get a couple of, unbelievers in there, but it won't matter because you will have won the day. So anytime you see that, and I've seen this on the other side too. I've seen preachers who will come in and they'll be preaching and they'll say, and students will try to challenge them and they'll say, I'm not going to talk to you. I just want to preach. I'm not here to debate. And students would come to me saying, well, why doesn't he want to debate? And you could see that they saw that he wasn't sure of his beliefs because he didn't want to debate them. So the best way, and I think I might have said this one before too, there was a guy who used to come out at Willard, and he would set up off to the side this table with all this anti-Holocaust, literature. The Holocaust never happened. And after he did that, and he, of course, would tend to come out on Jewish holy days. And after he did this for a while, some Jewish students came up to me and they said, we're thinking about trying to get him kicked off campus. What do you think? I said, no, that's the worst thing you can do, because then people are going to say, well, what were they afraid of? Why wouldn't they let him speak? Is there something to this? So if you really want to discredit him, right across the way, Schwab Auditorium or Eisenhower Auditorium down the road, challenge him to a debate. Get your best Holocaust defender and challenge him. And everybody then can see that he doesn't know what he's talking about. His facts aren't really facts. And you'll win the day and he'll be disgraced and he won't come back again. But so that's the way you do it. You deal with things that you think are wrong and you give better facts and better ideas. You don't try to destroy the opposition by not letting them speak, not letting them get their stuff out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a lot of propaganda around that as well. I mean, just talking about things like the Scopes monkey trial, which was never really a trial, and just the way that we tend to teach these things and the way that we tend to marginalize the other side is the creation side is pretty telling, like you said.
Yeah. So anyhow, again, if you can watch that. Watch Matt Walsh's presentation. If you think we weren't fair, write us, let us know.
Yeah.
Give us the time, the little time date there, so we can go back and look at it. And we'll, if we think you're right, or maybe if we don't think you're right, we'll deal with it at some future podcast. But I think we've been pretty fair to him. We've given our side and let him put his side out there, and everybody can now look and see what they think and see what they believe and go from there. But just remember, your presuppositions are key. That's how you're going to see things. And I remember saying this before, but I had this young kid, I hate to say kid, being bad as everybody else. Young student, freshman student, came out first day of class a few years ago, fall semester. And he said he wanted to tell me his life beliefs. So I said, all right, that's why I'm here. Go for it. And he said, he started out with he can't know who God is, and argued very logically from there and came to his conclusion. And I said, well, do you know your first belief to be true? And he said, no. I said, well, then you can't know your conclusion to be true. And he was a smart kid. He understood that. Yeah. But that's the thing. Do you know your first belief to be true? As Christians, we know, our first belief to be true because God was there and he revealed it. But do you know naturalism is true? And how could you know that? So, maybe you think the evidence fits that best. That's up to you. Everybody can make, that's why we love America. Everybody can put their stuff out there and you can decide what you think about it. So we've put ours out there. I think we've been fair to Matt Walsh in putting his out there, and you can let us know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is probably one of the more technical, detailed arguments that we've tried to walk through. So if someone objects or has something that they want us to elaborate on, please put it in the comments or email, and we'd be happy to deal with that for sure. Would you like to look at the scripture verses that you sent me?
Yeah, we can for a minute.
Okay. All right. Let me.
It'll be kind of reiterating some things, but I think it might be valuable.
Okay. All right, we're good. Right. So of course we start with Genesis.
Yeah, and here's what, and I want to show you. I don't think I'm pretty sure we didn't play this part, but it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Right now, what some people do, including Matt Walsh, is they stop there and they say that there is different from the second verse. The earth was without form and void. And even there are some church fathers, a minority of them, that do that. They say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and they say this was an indefinite amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then he says the earth was without form and void. And I suppose you can read it that way. I think in modern days we tend to read it that way because there's verse 1 and verse 2. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the water. You don't have to read it that way, certainly. That can certainly all be taken as one thing. In the beginning, meaning in the beginning of time, when God started doing things, he created the heaven and the earth. And then it describes the earth. It doesn't have to be billions and billions and billions of years before those two things. And St. Basil, when he talks about without form and void, I think I remember Matt Walsh saying, can anybody really understand that? Well, basically, he said the earth was the land mass, and it was without form and void because you couldn't see it because it was covered with water, lots of water, and it was dark. Right? So that was his take on it. Mm-hmm. And then God said, let there be light. There was light. God saw the light, and it was good. God divided the light from the darkness. That's, again, St. Basil says that, and I'm quoting St. Basil pretty much exclusively. We have other church fathers we can bring in, but I've been reading him. So that's where he says, that's when God would put the light out, bring it back in, and that would be light day, and the darkness he called night. Evening and morning were the first day. So that's what we were talking about. Evening and morning, the first day. That very much specifies how long the day was.
Right. Now, yeah, not eons.
No, it doesn't say eons and eons and eons. Then God said, now this is what we're talking about. It was just the third day. God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, the fruit tree that yields fruit, according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so. Now, all the church fathers that I've ever read said, when God spoke, these things came into existence fully formed and ready to reproduce. None of them say there was just eons and eons and eons where, stuff just had to kind of slowly but gradually figure itself out. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So evening and morning were the third day. Okay, again, as we said before, this is before the sun. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to say, oh, well, you can't have evening, you can't have a 24-hour day before the sun, well, how can you have all this before the sun? Obviously, God is not limited as we think he should be limited. And again, just to reiterate, he said that God did this in his day, so that the pagans couldn't say that the sun is the creator of life. And we can say that to the scientists. So scientists can't say it's the sun that gave us life. No, it's God who gave us life. And he doesn't need the sun to have all the grass and the green herbs and the fruit trees to be, already grown and reproduced, ready to reproduce.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think Matt Walsh asserted that, and again, someone they're welcome to, of course, to watch the entire video. He basically says church fathers are kind of ambiguous as to whether it's 6 days or whatever. But like you said, every church father that you read, certainly, I haven't read it as much, but everyone that I've read, there's no sense in what they're talking about that it's like some sort of metaphor or it's super long period of time. It's like, yeah, of course, the earth brought forth grass, the herb yielded seed, and fruit tree was there with fruit. It wasn't, you really almost, you have to jump in through all sorts of different hoops if you're this Christian that's trying to fit this evolutionary framework into what you're reading here in Genesis.
Yeah, I read one paragraph that was put out, the Catholic apologists put out a number of these things, which may have been where Matt Walsh got his stuff. But he said Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, and Augustine were the ones that he listed that said that these days weren't really days. Clement of Alexandria, I hate just to go by one paragraph because it's not in context, but he seemed to say, when God says in the beginning and so on, that could have been an extended period of time. We couldn't see the Justin Martyr thing. I didn't see anything about that. As we'll see here, I think we have the Augustine quote, but when we can look at that whenever we get to it. Usually when the church fathers say it wasn't a day, they're usually taking the scripture that says to God, a day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day. And they're taking that kind of literally. And they're saying, okay, well, maybe each one of these days was 1,000 years. All right. But that's not billions. Right. That's 1,000. So they're not getting anywhere close to where you could get to get this long, slow evolutionary process.
Right.
All right. And finally, fourth day, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens. God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs and seasons, for days and years. Let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. So when we were talking about God creating the stars, he created the stars to light the earth. So why wouldn't they be lighting the earth?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they have to wait billions of years to do their job? Why can't he just create them and so they light the earth? And it was so. There's no sense here that they had to take billions of years. You can believe it if you want, but then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light to the earth, light on the earth, right? So that's their job, to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night. What St. Basil says is, he didn't say to create the day and the night. He said to rule over the day and the night. So that was his take when God created the light, put it out there, brought it back, and that was the first day and the second day and the third day. But now this says he didn't say to create the day and the night, but to rule it, to divide the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So the other thing is, as we spoke, each one of these days, God says it was good. In the end, we didn't put the scripture up there, but he looked at everything and said it was good.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's death and destruction and corruption and disease. Is all of this good? Does God call this stuff good? And we would say, no, here's Augustine's quote that we look at, because he mentions Augustine. And this is an interesting quote, because he seems to say what Matt Walsh is saying at first, but then you'll see in a little bit that he's really not. 7 days by our reckoning, after the model of the days of creation, make up a week. By the passage of such weeks, time rolls on. In these weeks, one day is constituted by the course of the sun from its rising to its setting. We must bear in mind that these days indeed recall the days of creation, but without in any way being really similar to them. So this seems to be what Matt Walsh was saying. At least we know that the Genesis creation day, is different from the ordinary day with which we are familiar. Okay, that goes right along with what Matt Walsh was saying. For in these days of creation, the morning and evening are counted until on the sixth day, all the things which God then made were finished, and on the seventh, the rest God was mysteriously and sublimely signalized. What kind of days these were is extremely difficult or perhaps impossible for us to conceive, and how much more to say. Now remember, Augustine is separated from the Eastern Fathers. So Augustine and Eastern Fathers didn't have much, they spoke different languages. They were in different parts of the world. They weren't really, conversing at all. So he says, we see that our ordinary days have no evening, but by the setting of the sun. Again, exactly what Matt Walsh said. And no morning, but by the rising of the sun. The first 3 days of all were passed without sun, since it is reported to have been made on the fourth day. And first of all, indeed, light was made by the word of God, and God, we read, separated it from the darkness and called the light day and the darkness night. What kind of light that was, and by what periodic movement it made evening and morning, is beyond the reach of our senses. So I'm pretty sure Matt Walsh got most of his stuff right from here. Neither can we understand how it was, and yet most unhesitatingly believe it. They, the pagans, are deceived too by those highly mendacious documents which profess to give the history of man as many thousands of years. Though reckoning by the sacred writings, we find that not 6,000 years have yet passed. So that's far cry from the whole secular idea that it's millions of years for man, billions of years for the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he says you can't really know, he still says thousands of years. Now, if you take that to mean just 6,000 years that man has been on the earth, you still have a conflict with science there. So either way, whether you say 6,000 years from the beginning of the creation or 6,000 years from the beginning of man, whatever you think he was saying there, you still have a big conflict between him and the scientists. Mm-hmm. And again, if you're going to take a Matt Walsh position where you have to always believe in science, you can't then quote Augustine, who is making, at the very least, man on the earth, if not the whole universe, at most 6,000 years.
Right. Yeah, and the bottom line, again, it is all about those presuppositions. Augustine's not wrong in terms of saying, what is the nature of those first few days of creation? Who can, it must have really been something. If there was some way for us to observe that, certainly Moses could see it, and that's what he was having revealed to him. But in the end, the reason why this is a debate, of course, is because it's a spiritual battlefield in the end, right? It's one that basically says, science has triumphed over this naive religious view. And, that basically what we're trying to say here is, someone doesn't need to feel naive to give this idea a chance. It hasn't ruled out this sort of viewpoint.
But in addition to that, it goes right to the heart of Christian salvation. Right. Is death really a tragedy? Mm-hmm. Because there was no death before then, and God doesn't create death and disease and destruction. Or does God create death and disease and destruction? Mm-hmm. And if he does, then how can he turn to Adam and Eve and say, when you eat of this, in that day you'll die, implying that this was a horrible thing, when death helped create Adam and Eve to begin with? So, and then Jesus comes to defeat death. Well, why does he have to defeat it if God made it that way, if God created it that way? If God used it for the good, why does he have to defeat it? This is God's doing. He's defeating what he himself did. Mm-hmm. So it really, if evolution is true, if this whole story is true, Big Bang, abiogenesis, and evolution, then Christianity is not. Mm-hmm. That's the real problem.
Yeah.
It's not just a technical feud of how old the universe is.
Yeah.
Is Christianity true or not? And that's why this is fought so hard by we Christians. It says something about God. What Jesus came to do is just ridiculous if what they say is true, and God created the universe already broken, mm-hmm. man already broken, the animals already broken, all of that, because man would have had to come on the scene. Because what the Catholic Church even says is that in the end, God breathed the soul of man. But the body of man would have been essentially created through death. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And yet death is bad.
Yeah.
It can't be. It just takes Christianity and turns it upside down. And I think that was the purpose of it to begin with. I think if we as Christians, we don't see that, then mm-hmm. we are unwittingly maybe giving our assent to our own destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. And if the Roman Catholic Church is willing to say, yeah, it's fine as long as you believe that God breathed the soul into Adam, that really says a lot about their view of salvation and their view of God. And those are not pleasant things, actually. That's just, I think maybe the way to say it is that is yet another, we've had plenty of podcasts about Roman Catholic things. It's just another emphasis of, look at how different our view of God and of salvation really is. if they can accept evolution and it still fits into their view of God and salvation, we're miles apart.
Yeah. And we're miles apart. That brings up something that I was talking to somebody today about. And they were asking about theosis, our understanding of the distinction between the distinction between the essence and energies of God. It's all the essence of God. It's all God. But we do make this distinction to be able to talk about it, that we can actually partake of God's nature without partaking of his identity. And I don't think that's understood in much of Roman Catholicism or Protestantism. And if you don't have that distinction, then how do you talk about being godlike?
Mm-hmm.
It's just an analogy. We as humans are going to be kind of like God as God. Because if we can't partake of God's nature, because in doing that, we'd be taking of his identity and become actual God, actually taking God's identity, that can't be. So it has to be something else. And I think the Catholics came up with created grace or something like that, that it isn't really the essence of God that we're partaking of. But it has to be if we're actually in the likeness of God. And so it brings down our salvation to a very low level.
Mm-hmm.
But we as humans are going to love perfectly, but only as humans love perfectly. And God is going to love perfectly as God loves perfectly. There's always going to be this distance between us and God that can't be overcome. But if we love with the love of God,
Mm-hmm.
and we have mercy with the mercy of God, and we have virtues with the actual virtues of God residing in us. And I think one of the church fathers said, everything but his identity, we become. Mm-hmm. That's miles apart from anything I've seen. Even those in the Protestant world, or even in the Roman Catholic world, maybe not totally in the Roman Catholic world, I haven't seen it all in either one, but they don't have anything like that. All this stuff, it colors our view of God, it colors our view of man, and it colors our view of salvation. If it's not right, we're going to get a skewed view of things, and we're not going to be able to fully, engage in our salvation. Of course, we say that salvation is only in the Orthodox Church. I think another evidence of that is this understanding that they don't understand theosis. Mm-hmm. Protestants don't believe there's any grace in their sacraments, most of them. They don't believe that the baptism saves them, or communion is the body and the blood of Christ, or, they don't have confession or anything like that. Marriage is done in bars and whatever, wherever they want to do it. They don't have this understanding. So, we're miles apart. This isn't just something where we have a couple different doctrines. Mm-hmm. We're miles and miles apart. And I think that's unfortunately being lost. I know this is a kind of a digression. I think that's unfortunately being lost. And we're just giving the impression that, we have the best doctrine.
Yeah.
We have the best worship. If that's all it is, then that's somewhat meaningless, right? It has to be more than that. And it is, because only in the Orthodox Church can you become godlike. That's the only place you can do it. That's the only place where that grace exists. We're not saying there's no grace anywhere else in the world, or you can't in some way, follow after Christ or something. Only in the Orthodox Church does the Holy Spirit reside in you. And do you put on Christ, and are you in Christ? Outside of it, the Holy Spirit resides outside of you, and you're following after Christ. And there's no way to become godlike, even if you adopt all the doctrines of the Orthodox Church. There's no way outside of it to become godlike, and it's never been done outside of the Orthodox Church, but it's done still today in the Orthodox Church. We just had Elder Ephraim die a couple of years ago, probably the holiest man in the world. Certainly, if there is a godlike person in the world, he was it. Mm-hmm. Right? And there's probably some cave somewhere in Mount Athos or whatever, or in monasteries or whatever, also, because we're still having this today. It's not something we just have to look back on thousands of years ago and say, oh yeah, they did it back then, but we can't do it today. Mm-hmm. Still in the Orthodox Church today, but it's nowhere else. And yes, the fullness of truth is here, the fullness of grace is here, but that means something more than just, we have a little bit more than you do.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you said that. We do have the best doctrine, we do have the best worship, but that's not the point of it. Those things are there to make you Christ-like, to make you one with God like that. And it might sound a little I don't know, it might seem like maybe a boastful claim, or a claim that's a little out there, but if we're saying that salvation is theosis, is becoming godlike fully, as much as that is possible as human beings, and that idea even isn't present elsewhere in Christianity, then how are you going to get to that if you don't even know of that idea? If you're not, if so it's just simply stating the facts in that case.
Yeah, and even if you do know of the idea, that doesn't mean you have the grace to get there.
Mm-hmm.
These things were all, when I was Protestant, we believed that everything in the Bible was for us, right? But everything in the Bible was for that church,
mm-hmm.
right? So is that church still here today? Then everything there is for you, but you have it in the right context. You understand the growth involved and everything. You just can't say, well, I'm a Christian now I can do miracles and know what people are thinking, or whatever, right? You know the process. You have all that from all the saints, but it's for that church. We believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. If that church is still here, the Church of the Apostles is still here, that's where everything is.
Mm-hmm.
There's no evidence that it's anywhere else. There's only evidence that it's there. We know of one church that Christ started. That was the church, that first church of the apostles. Is that church still here today? Does it still have the same doctrine and manner of worship? Does it still produce godlike people? Then that's the only church. Everything else we call churches, but they're not really churches. And yes, God does work within them. God is gracious and merciful, and will bring them into heaven. But that's such a lower bar than the ability to become godlike.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can follow Christ into heaven. He will lead you into heaven, but he can't make you godlike unless you're in the church that he gave these promises to.
Mm-hmm.
Can't be outside that church and think you have the same promises.
Yeah, we had a couple of, I guess 2 episodes ago now, we had a couple of comments, and one of them was just like, well, I'm not convinced, because we were talking about scriptures that the Protestants can't answer, and the first comment, or the shorter comment, was, well, I'm just not convinced. Okay. The other one was sort of an exposition about, well, I believe that it's all about the word, and it's about this, and it's about this. That's fine, but nevertheless, you can hold whatever individual belief you want. You can, like you said, you could even hold an individual belief that is perfectly theologically, doctrinally aligned with the Orthodox. But if you're just not a part of that, if you're not actually a part of the holy mysteries, the sacramental life of the church, the worship there, the life, the spiritual disciplines, all those things that are going to make you Christ-like, then okay, you're holding beliefs. May God help you, but you're missing out on something pretty big there.
Yeah, and saying I'm not convinced really doesn't mean anything. Or saying I believe in the word doesn't mean it. Tell us why you're not convinced. Tell us why you believe in sola scriptura. Then we can maybe do something with it. Maybe we can then, explain why we think that you don't have the fullness of the understanding there. So if you're going to write something and want us to respond, you can't just say I'm not convinced, because how are we supposed to deal with that? How are we supposed to know why you're not convinced? Or well, I just believe in sola scriptura. Okay, well, why? We just gave you reasons why tradition is, you have to follow the tradition. Why do you think we're seeing that wrong? Tell us why, and then maybe we can answer you. But just saying we're not convinced, or I just believe the word. What does I just believe the word mean? Every Protestant says that,
right?
But they all disagree. So it's kind of an irrelevant statement. Well, you have to do more than that if you want us to respond. If you just want to throw something up there, that's fine. You can throw anything up there you want. If you want us to respond, you have to be a little more specific than that.
Yeah, that is something that I feel like I've run across before with somewhat, some Protestant friend or something. We used to go here, but now we go here. Oh yeah, how are you liking? Oh, I really like it. They really seem to follow the Bible, and okay, that's that's better than not, I suppose, but it's following what you have determined is the criteria for following and being a good community. Doesn't mean you're actually part of the church. Sorry.
And it doesn't mean you're seeing the scriptures correctly.
Right.
That's the whole problem, right? How do you know you're reading them correctly when the person next door to you reads them differently?
Yep.
And how do you know when you disagree, where do you go as a tiebreaker?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you both disagree on the scriptures and you both believe the Holy Spirit's guiding you, where do you go from there? There's no place to go. If the church has always believed, if you can show from century, how as far back as you can go, which is at least before the year 200, from what my research showed me, and almost all the time before that, you know, and you can show this is what's been believed all along, that's a lot more convincing than my personal understanding of the scriptures.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
I've got a little bit off on a tangent there, but
yeah, it's
all right.
always good. It's always good. And checking the clock, it does look like it's getting late in State College.
Always late in State College.
Christ is risen, Gary.
Indeed, he is risen.
Have a good night.
Yep.